Our next speaker is going to help you communicate attack to a bit of an unusual audience, the CFO. Please welcome to the ATT&CKcon stage the Director of Distilled Security, Phil Davies.
Thank you very much indeed. So pleased to see the MITRE ATT&CK Python library. You might see some evidence of that in use in terms of some of the graphics that I'm using this afternoon. So that's quite a segue, isn't it? I've got about 12 minutes to go through a way of visualizing MITRE ATT&CK techniques so that you can have better conversations about security risk reduction and focused security investment. So we probably best get on with it. I'm not very good at speaking about myself, but essentially I missed a memo on the hobbies, but I'm also a scuba diver, rescue diver about 2001, I suppose, from now, and really interested in photography as well, but also collect a million hobbies like the gentleman earlier on. I've been about in IT and security for a while, and you'll usually find me as an independent contractor working with teams to build remediation plans off the back of red teams and similar pen test and breach attack simulation engagements across a number of sectors. So let's just start with some context if we can. The CFO wants to have detailed conversations, but they want to have detailed conversations about risk. They want to have detailed conversations about the financial implications of what you're asking them. And they want to have detailed conversations about the timeline over which those remediations are going to take place. Because ultimately, until those remediations have taken place, you don't really get a chance to say that you're safe. So from the CFO's point of view, that's more risk that they have to worry about. In times of increased adversity and financial hardship, we have to be able to draw a line. We can't do everything that we'd like to be able to do. Gosh, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? But we can't. So we have to select the initiatives that are going to help us make the biggest impact on our organizations, on the organizations that we're protecting. And we need a way of doing that so that the CFO can get engaged when you're making these pitches at the investment review boards or what have you. So on the one hand, you've got the CFO who has this kind of desire for information, and increasingly they're technically astute. Maybe they don't spend all their time looking at cyber issues, but they do understand more technology than we give people credit for. And we've got them on one side. We've got our technical detail information, which I'll show has some synergies with some of the other presentations that we've seen today. But we need a way of joining those things together. So preferably, it would be a mechanism that can visualize things so that the CFO can understand and get engaged. It'd be great if you could also use that same mechanism to measure the improvements that you're making. And actually, it would be really good if it looked beautiful too. So this is no surprise because 15 other people have shown similar diagrams today. So chuffed to bits that that's been validated. You can see that on MITRE, there is so much information as on these attack navigator layers that it's very difficult to see that at any level of detail. Every CFO is going to be finding that it's a challenge to understand what you're talking. Why are you coming to me talking about this? From a security point of view, this is quite exclusive. It's not engaging, and whilst I've been doing this for years and try and get over that hurdle verbally, it's not so easy. I do know that MITRE has a number of projects looking at visualization and how to improve things, and I'm wondering whether this might be a possible answer. So I like Sankey diagrams. I love visualization, as I mentioned before. Sankey diagram's good because it shows you the relationships between things. It shows you the flows that shows how things are linked together. So this particular example is looking at log source types and why on the right-hand side that's useful to you as incident responders and detection and response engineers. Sankey diagrams make things useful, and because of that, I thought this might be an interesting place to go when I'm thinking about describing MITRE attack techniques. So if you can just imagine now that you've just been handed a red team report. It's got a whole bunch of T numbers at the bottom, and you want to be able to show that, but you want to be able to show it in a way that people can engage. So this is what I've come up with. If you stitch a Sankey diagram together and recognize that it can have multiple sources, can fold into multiple sinks and extend that out. If you build essentially mini Sankey diagrams for each tactic, you can start to see against each of those techniques all of the possible flows that an attacker might take through your environment. What I quite like about this is that you don't have to look at the detail. You can instantly see where, there was somebody talking earlier on about choke points. There are natural choke points around the command and control and credential access area that actually, if you really sweat that with your detection and response controls or your prevention controls, you've got an opportunity to change the game. You've actually got an opportunity to try and prevent attacks reaching the right-hand side, the impact. Now, when you're walking through and saying, I'd like to invest in a stronger authentication for my critical data sources, or I'd like to spend some more time with some engineers tuning my EDR so that I can find more things in the privilege escalation and persistence space. If you're having that conversation and the CFO can see why and what impact that's going to have, that's quite interesting to them. You can also use this with sub-techniques, and bear with me on this one. From a SOC response point of view, you can take into account something like Lazarus Group, which would be potentially a threat actor that you're interested in, that may be interested in your organization. And you can then use that information to plan what your detection and response strategies will be. Or if you had an incident that was in play and you're able to look at that and find, you had some attribution maybe that some of these techniques were in play, you'd know how you'd be able to direct your analysts both to contain the incident on the right-hand side and also to go after the beginning of the incident where it started on the left-hand side. So Lazarus Group obviously turned up in a couple of other sessions earlier on. You can see the extent to which they really go to town on the total number of techniques that are in place there. If you look at this option, this is the kind of the zoomed in version. If you take each of the tactics and then multiply the number of techniques in each tactic area and multiply that through from left to right, you get the total number of attacker paths that can be taken through your organization based on that red team scenario. And what that's quite useful for is a baseline. You can use that as a start point, but you can recalculate that and you'll end up with thousands and thousands of paths in a normal organization as you go through this. But what you'll find is that it doesn't take a huge number of techniques to remove before you start getting a real material change in that number. And that can be really useful from a board level who don't understand the detail and what's going on in the techniques, to just have a number that is representative of the threat landscape that you're in, that can vary with the threat landscape, the amount of remediation progress that you're making. It's more or less objective. It's about as close as to objective measurement as you can get at the moment. So from that perspective, I think that's quite neat. So I've taken a rather extreme example here. This is APT28, only because it's quite prolific in terms of the number of techniques that it uses. But if you can imagine zooming out, not looking at the detail, you can have a conversation about, well, okay, maybe the total number of initial access vectors there is too large. We need to spend some time on our email security gateway, on our forward proxy, on our endpoints to make sure that EDR is working properly. And if you can put a number next to that and have that conversation, the CFO is engaged. All of a sudden, they're like, okay, I can see exactly where you're going with this. You're making it more difficult for it to start, so because then you don't want it to get to the right-hand side. That's really interesting. So what can we do about this discovery part in the middle, where it's kind of super narrow? And you can be having a conversation about, well, actually, why don't you consider that you've got a cloud transformation going on at the moment? It's possible, if you do that right, that you can try and engineer out the vast majority of those discovery pieces, because you don't have to leave your assets where they are, visible, using all of those old-fashioned protocols that make discovery really easy. So if you get your cloud transformation right, use some signed binaries for your containers, and make it difficult with an identity and access management profile and guardrails, you can really, really hone down how difficult it is for an attacker to do the discovery and ultimately to be able to move laterally through your organization. If you can sever that link, or make it significantly more difficult, then, why not? That's secure by design, isn't it? So from that perspective, just summing up, I'm coming up with here an opportunity to visualize MITRE attack techniques in aggregate, hopefully in a novel way. We've got an opportunity to measure and to improve ourselves by remeasuring over the baseline period of our project. And it's not hard to look at from that perspective, and the board are engaged. I'd be really chuffed to bits if MITRE would consider taking this on under their wing as a way of seeing all pen test reports, all red team reports, being presented like that. And I guess from my perspective, that's all I've got for you today. But thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And of course, the thanks go to you, not only for the great presentation, but also as a visual learner. Like exactly your point, absorb this a little bit quicker than a long list of procedures and whatnot. Both are great, but I think, like you said, picking up on the themes of the day, knowing your audience is really important. And I think that actually, to your point, aligns with something that we heard earlier of your financial overlords, your CFO, whoever you want to phrase it. They're people too. They have perspectives. They have their own background, expertise. So really, that ability to connect those perspectives, bring it together, and solve problems is really important.
Yeah, they want to be involved.
Exactly. We do have time for maybe one question. If it's something quick, I think there's a hand up. Oh, in the front.
So all the possible attack paths that you mentioned has already been calculated, because I see a great idea for interactive math. Start with some of the techniques. So it's where we spend our money. Does that exist yet?
Just to repeat for the online audience, is basically, has all of the attack paths been enumerated, or how do you go about that, or is this more just representing specific data sets?
Yeah, okay, thanks. So the stuff I've shown you today has been predominantly sample information based off red team reports or breach attack simulation results. So what will happen is that you've run an attack simulation or an emulation, and all of the techniques that were found have then been put down here. And then this automatically generates those based off the latest attack version using the MITRE Python. The APT groups are generated again using the MITRE Python solution, and the thing behind the scenes is a chap called Steve Bogart came up with Sankey-Matic, and it just allows you to paste in strings, and it produces you these beautiful pictures.
That was going to be my next question about what tool you is that publicly available?
It is. It's free. It's open source. The mechanisms by which we're doing this, I'd like to share with the community, but I'd like to give sort of MITRE first go at having a look at that to see whether that's something that you'd like to take forward as a project first.
So I have two offers. One, a token of our appreciation, and a big
thank you very much.
Congratulations. And I'm going to walk you over to our software lead and maybe have a fun conversation.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.